Greetings, folks, and welcome to today's show. Our subject today is water supply. And water is always something that we're very much interested in. Unfortunately, we tend to take it for granted, you know, assuming it'll always be there, which is not necessarily the case. So we want to talk about how we make sure we do continue to have water. And we have with us today the Executive Director of the Tennessee Duck River Development Agency. The Duck River Agency is usually the more common term. His name is Doug Murphy, and he's going to tell us how all this happens. So Doug, thanks for joining us, and let's begin by giving the folks a little background on you.
Well, Tom, thanks first for having me today. I've looked forward to this ever since you called last week. I can say I've been truly fortunate. I've worked in natural resource management my whole career, and that's kind of what brought me to the Duck River region, is my background in resource management, in particular around water resources. And I worked with TVA for almost 28 years before I came to the Duck River Agency about 6 years ago.
Okay. All right. Well, so you have been at it for quite a while. Well, let's. You had to relocate, you said, from Guntersville?
Yes, sir. I'm an Alabama boy. I came up from Guntersville, Alabama. Originally grew up in Florence, Alabama, but I've got strong connections to the Duck River region because my mother's family is all from Columbia and Murray County.
Yes.
And so I essentially grew up playing on the Duck River in Murray County. That's where my granddaddy took us on Saturday afternoons usually.
Well, I'm an Alabama boy too.
Oh.
Where'd you go to school?
I ended up finishing up at University of North Alabama in Florence. I got on a college program with TVA, and was able to go to school and work at TVA at the same time.
Very good.
And it was a very good program.
Okay. Well, with that, folks, let's take a short commercial break, and we'll come back and find out how the water supply business works.
The highest standard of trust offers a sense of safety and comfort. It's established over time. You know when you see it. You know when you feel it. There's a standard of trust in healthcare. It's the Joint Commission Gold Seal of Approval. In 2003, Life Care Center of Tullahoma voluntarily achieved this accreditation and maintains it still today. Life Care, meeting a higher standard because residents matter most.
Let the Smokehouse be your mountain getaway destination in beautiful Monteagle, Tennessee. Enjoy our cabins, restaurant, and old general store. Shop thesmokehouse.com featuring homemade barbecue sauces, jellies, and many other fine Tennessee products. Our live Music on the Mountain series features some of the best local and Nashville talent every Friday and Saturday night, 6:30 p.m. No cover, kids welcome.
We're talking today, folks, with Doug Murphy, who is Executive Director of the Duck River Agency. And it's his job to make sure we all have water, good stuff. So there's got to be a dozen organizations around that begin with Duck River. Distinguish them for us. What is your job, and how do you fit into all that?
Well, Tom, we get a lot of those phone calls from those other agencies too, because we're listed as the first one in the telephone book as Duck River Agency, and so we get a lot of phone calls. But the Duck River Agency was formed in 1965 by state legislation for the people of the Duck River region as an economic development agency, and water supply was their focus. The first project that they proposed was known as the Duck River Project, which was building Normandy Reservoir and Columbia Reservoir. And if you've been around long enough, you know the history. The Columbia Reservoir was never built, and Normandy Reservoir was completed and finished and impounded in 1976. Columbia
was almost built, but not.
It was almost.
Yeah, we won't go into that.
That's a different story, another day maybe. But the agency's mission statement is to develop, protect, and sustain a clean and dependable water resource for all citizens of the Duck River region. And And what that means is
Is the region the whole watershed? I mean, you cover from here to the time it flows back into the Tennessee?
Yes, sir. Just about all the way, at least all the way to the west side of the Hickman County line, and that just leaves a little bit in Perry County, I believe. But there's not any water systems in that area. So essentially, it's the 5-county area that we represent, and we represent 7 water systems in that 5-county area.
Okay, including ours.
Including Tullahoma and Manchester.
Yeah. Okay, and your budget, your money comes from?
That's really an interesting fact that I found out a lot of people don't really know about. But the agency is funded by sales of water. Utilities, each water system, for every 1,000 gallons of water they sell, a nickel is put into the agency's trust fund. Okay. And what that, and I'm sure every water system passes that out right on down to their customer, that nickel.
Have to.
Now what does that mean? The average home or family in the Duck River region uses about 5,000 gallons of water a month. That's just an average.
A month.
So that's about 25 cents, you can say, on average per family that goes in to the trust fund for long-term water supply in the Duck River region.
Yeah, you never see that, folks, but it's in your water bill. You just don't see it.
That's part of doing business, and that was really something that this agency or this region is different than other areas, because most people don't really look at long-term water supply like we have, and where we have funds to be able to do that.
Huh. Okay. All right. Well, in our initial discussions, it turns out you've got several projects that in varying stages of development. You want to run over those briefly and then tell us maybe which one or two are going to come up in the next year or two?
I can, but let me back up for just a second. What the agency did in 2008 through 2010 is we developed a comprehensive regional water supply plan. This, from when I came to the agency in 2006, decisions were not being made logically. They were being made off of perception, emotion, and politics. So we developed a water supply plan to help take that out and put good science and good decision-making tools together to help us decide what needed to be done in the future. Okay. The first thing we did was develop a needs assessment. The needs assessment was going to tell us when we would run out of water by population growth. In other words, you took what water we have in the Duck River and Normandy Reservoir, and we were able to model all of this and take population growth over the next 50 years and develop a model to tell us when we would see a deficit in water. We also included climate patterns in that model and everything we could about the Duck River itself.
Well, I'll buy it. In the next 50 years, how much are we going to grow?
Well,
people-wise.
Nobody has a crystal ball, and if I had that crystal ball, I could have more exact science.
Right.
But what we did, we took historical growth and of the region, and we worked with the Center of Business and Economic Research from the University of Tennessee that makes population projections. We took TVA's projections on electrical sales and how they see growth in their projections for water needs. And then we also took numbers with the United States Geological Survey and did some growth projections with them. After we took all of that together, we kind of hit a middle line and developed our projections, but roughly it's about 1 to 1.5% a year, to answer your question.
Okay.
And so that's what we based our needs assessment on. There wasn't any use going into developing a plan with alternatives until we figured out what the problem was. Once the problem was figured out, then we could start selecting projects or alternative solutions for water supply that made sense. We started with a list of over 40 alternatives for water supply. And as we went through that list, we developed a criterion matrix, and each project had to meet 7 criteria. If they did not meet a criteria, they fell out of the project list. And time the investigation was completed, it took about a year to investigate all the projects the best we could at a high level. And we came up with our short list and of projects. Basically what we ended up with was 3 non-structural projects and 2 structural projects. The non-structural projects deal with water management, how we manage our water we have. We have a regional drought plan that we're in the process of completing. I think that will be completed in the next 12 months. The regional drought plan, for short, is essentially an insurance policy or an emergency plan for action on how the river and the reservoir would be operated during an extended dry period.
Yeah, we began to see some need of that, I guess, probably in the last several years. I think, what, 2007,
2008 was one of the worst droughts we've had in about 100 years on record. And
got everybody's attention, didn't it?
It made my job easy. I got people to the table because we held work sessions when we were developing these alternatives that included 50 to 70 individuals from all the agencies in the federal, state, and local agencies that dealt with the Duck River and any other water needs. And of course, the water systems, the public water systems, are very much important and part of this study, along with all the environmental groups that had concerns about the Duck River and managing water. So it's a very complicated process that we tried to develop tools to help us make the right decisions.
And lots of folks have a stake in it somewhere. Lots of different agencies on the,
Just about everybody that you can name probably has a stake in it.
Hard to get everybody nodding in one direction, isn't it?
It is, but I think we've been pretty successful at it, really, because we had a very open process through the whole planning period, which lasted a little over a year. And we had work sessions. Open
and also systematically organized.
Everybody knew what the next step was. We developed the process before we even started, and everybody knew what the next steps were and how we were going to make decisions. Ground rules were set up front. We had public open houses that we invited public to come in to see our progress and how we were doing through the whole thing. We had about 6 public open houses through the region during that period. But it was just the process itself was unique, and it was well worth going through that to come up with our end point.
Okay. You mentioned your 3 non-structural. How about a couple of structural ones, right?
Right. I mentioned the regional drought plan. Another water management or non-structural is optimizing the releases at Normandy Reservoir. TVA operates Normandy to meet state constraints and river flows. So we're working with them to optimize those releases, making sure every gallon of water that comes out of Normandy during a drought period is used wisely.
Yeah.
The third one is a water use efficiency program. This is a program that we'll initiate this year that will help define how we use our water in the Duck River region, all the way from the homeowner to industrial use. After we learn how we use our water, we're going to start looking at how we can be more efficient at using that water. There'll be a lot of educational programs in that. Those 3 projects, we're not moving dirt. We're not moving any concrete. Nothing's being built. But they're projects that have to be done to help us realize how we manage our water, become more efficient. Now, the 2 structural projects, those are a little bit more controversial. And I'll be glad to get into those a little bit too while we're here.
Well, let's do that. But first, let's take a short commercial break, and then we'll look at those.
All right. I told you.
Who needs this modern world? I can live just fine out here without the road rage and boy bands. Of course, I might miss my Charter HD with football on ESPN and Walking Dead on AMC. ESPN and AMC. And, well, Shark Week on Discovery HD, but that's all. AMC, ESPN, Discovery, TBS, and Comedy Central HD, but that's it. except for HBO HD.
Charter now has over 100 HD channels and more brilliant HD shows on demand than ever.
We're back, folks, and we're talking today about water supply and management, and we have with us Doug Murphy, who is the Executive Director of the Duck River Agency. Before we broke, we talked about your three non-structural projects, I think, and you've got two constructional projects.
Yes, sir.
So let's talk some about those.
Well, the two structural projects, those two alternatives that fell out of our criteria matrix were pretty interesting projects. And I'm going to spend more time talking about the Normandy Reservoir project than I am about the Murray County project, since our audience is here in this region. But there is one project that we're looking at in Murray County that involves getting new water to Columbia from moving an intake further downstream than where they're located now. That's a separate project. The project I think that folks around here are really interested in is increasing the capacity at Normandy Reservoir. Now, back in 2000, TVA came out with a plan of how water supply would be addressed in this area if Columbia Reservoir was not finished. One of their projects was raising Normandy Reservoir 5 foot. And I'm talking about raising the whole reservoir, the summer pool, the dam, the winter pool, the new lamp, a whole new 5 foot on top of what you have up there right now. We looked at that project a little bit different. That might not have been the most environmental friendly approach to that for additional water supply, but the big problem we have in Normandy Reservoir is TVA draws it down in the wintertime for flood control, about 11 foot from what the summer pool is. So we looked at it and modeled it. If we could fill Normandy Reservoir every year, or most years, that would carry us through a 2-year drought and possibly a 3-year drought to meet all needs in the river. But what didn't make sense is TVA couldn't fill it every year. So what we proposed is, let's add 5 foot to the winter pool only. In other words, when it's down in the winter pool, what you see at 864, we would add 5 feet at that, which would bring it up to 869. Now, TVA's flood management policy will not let them do that. So we've had to look at how we would structurally handle that difference in loss of flood storage, because we've lost 5 foot now. So TVA is going to have to look at expanding the top of the reservoir, or top of the dam, I'm sorry, to cover for that. And that's going to be somewhere between 3 and 5 foot, depending on what the engineers calculate that is needed.
That from an engineer.
Right. Yeah. We'll let the engineers figure that out. But what we're interested in is that additional 5 feet. The models indicate that we would be filling that reservoir every year then. So it's got good recreational impacts, positive recreational impacts, because we know a lot of folks well, we have several residents that live out there that you know, they get upset when the reservoir doesn't fill and their boat houses are dry and they can't get their boats out. We have boat ramps that maybe the water's not high enough to launch boats, so there are recreational impacts to TVA, or to that TVA reservoir, if it doesn't fill up. For the water supply side of it, it just makes a lot of sense, because we're not really developing new ground here. We're taking existing ground and using it with increasing the floodplain around the reservoir. And that increase in that floodplain is just a little over 50 acres of land that could be impacted during a flood of that TVA would need to use that additional storage. And that's a management call by TVA when they would have to use that additional. And most of the time it would be to keep flooding off of agricultural lands or Shelbyville downstream.
Well, okay. And that control, really, you're talking more about what's downstream than what's behind Normandy, is that correct?
It's
From a flood stage.
for a flood stage, right. Right.
Okay.
And I know we'll have impacts around the reservoir, but they're a lot less than what they would be if that reservoir had been raised 5 feet total for summer pool. And so we feel like this is a really good project to look at. We have begun the stability analyses, or the initial engineering analyses. We've been working a little over a year with an engineering firm that's working with TVA to go through those. That initial analyses will determine the feasibility of the project. We had an estimated fee of what it would take to raise that dam by TVA, but it was very ballpark. These initial analyses will give us a number that we can count on what it would actually cost to raise that construction. If it turns into be a $100 million project, man, that's just not feasible. It would cost too much. If it turns in somewhere around a $20 million project, that's probably feasible for us to really look at. And so we're going through that process right now. The next steps after this is done and we determine it is feasible is starting the environmental studies, more conceptual design and engineering analyses. Probably, I would guess, 3 to 5 years of just paperwork, because we're working with TVA. It's a federal project. We have to meet certain level of standards here, and so don't get your hopes up that the reservoir is going to be raised by next summer. It will not. Or if you're on the other side and don't want it raised, you know, we're still several years away from making those real decisions to move any dirt.
Right. And if it goes the way you now think the way you'd like to go, what impact is that going to have on Short Springs?
Well, you know, Short Springs is a beautiful area up there. Most of the area that would be impacted is already in the floodplain and has already experienced flooding. Let me just throw a quick number out at you, and I'm pretty close to being accurate on this. In the record of history, in our model, if we wanted to create, we can create Normandy Reservoir like it was there 80 years, okay? We got 80 years worth of information or data in that model. With the climate events that have happened in the past, it would have showed flooding that area 7 to 8 times. With this new program and new policy and raising that winter pool, we would almost double that during a period of record, another 80 years. It would go from 7 or 8 times up to somewhere 14 to 16 times that water could be on part of Short Springs. You have to realize flooding is really a short time event too. A lot of those events probably wouldn't last an hour or two. Maybe the longest event a little over a day. It depends on how quick TVA can let the water out on the other side.
I was going to say, that really is determined by releasing the water from the reservoir while it's filling up.
Right, right. Yeah. And what time of the year. There's a lot of factors into what could possibly happen up there. But there is a small rim right there in the Short Springs area that possibly could see some new impacts or new flooding that hadn't experienced it before. So the impacts of Short Springs area would be very, very minimal. And they wouldn't occur anywhere except in what I think they call the Wildflower Loop, which is down right next to the reservoir. And like I said, that's a floodplain area, a designated floodplain area already.
Well, you mentioned we're going to run out of time in a minute. You mentioned that. So you're looking at 5 years, or maybe, and at one point you said something like 10 years before you start moving dirt.
You know, It could be. I don't think it'll happen any quicker than 5 years before any construction you would see, and it could be 10 years, time we have everything in place.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, folks, we're beginning to run out of time, so let's take a short commercial break. We're going to have to wrap up.
Mark, you've won just about everything there is to win in racing. What's next?
I'd like more people to know about ER Extra.
The emergency room at Harton Regional Medical Center?
I just want them to get the best care they can get.
That just gets me right here, Mark.
Maybe you'd like to pay them a visit.
ER Extra at Harton Regional Medical Center.
ER Extra. Extra fast, extra easy, extra great.
Get your news first, fast, and free with your news leader on 6 every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday nights at 6, 8, and 10 p.m. Local weather, sports, community calendar events, and a comprehensive look at the latest news stories and news makers as only a video news broadcast can do. Get it first, fast, and free with News Leader on Channel 6, your local information network.
We're back, folks, and we've been talking today with Doug Murphy, who is the Executive Director of the Duck River Agency, which is responsible for making sure that we have water down the way. And so, Doug, is there a little message you'd like to deliver to the folks on the water business?
Well, you've heard my kind of great scheme of where we're going with our water supply issues. I would encourage everybody to really think about this and get involved as much as you'd like to. But what we're doing is not really for you and I, but what we're doing is building a future for our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren, because we're looking at a 50-year plan with a 100-year vision. And I would encourage people to go to our website. We have a lot of information on our website about the water supply plan. It's www.duckriveragency.org.
Okay.
Or you can just Google Duck River Agency, you're going to find us.
Yeah.
But we have a lot of information there. Our water supply plan is only about 40 pages, and it's really easy to read. But what's behind that water supply plan is over 700 pages of appendices that was involved in the decision-making process.
Wow. Okay. All right, and I think, as you say, it's be somewhere between 5 and 10 years before you would begin any kind of construction, if it goes according to plan now.
If it goes according to plan, but we have plenty of work to do between now and then, and sometimes you just don't know what the end product might be until tomorrow.
Well, again, thanks for joining us, Doug. It's been very informative, and we, as I say, folks, we're kind of in danger of assuming that the water will always be there, and that's not necessarily true. So, thanks for joining us, though, and we will see you next time.